The moon hung low in the night sky, casting a cold silver glow over an endless stretch of desolate highway. Sam had been driving for hours, his eyes heavy and his gas gauge teetering on empty. His GPS had long since lost signal, leaving him reliant on the hope of stumbling upon a town or even a lone gas station. As if in answer to his unspoken prayers, a flickering neon sign appeared on the horizon. Jasper's Gas and Diner, open 24 hours. Relief washed over him as he turned off the highway, tires crunching on the gravel lot. The gas station seemed frozen in time. Its pumps were rusted relics of another era, and the diner attached to it glowed with a dim, almost sickly light. Inside, shadowy figures sat unmoving, their forms silhouetted against the diner's frosted windows. Sam shook off a creeping sense of unease. "Just get gas and go," he muttered to himself as he stepped out of the car. The bell above the gas station door jingled as Sam walked inside. The air smelled of old grease and something metallic. Behind the counter stood Earl, a man whose presence felt both ordinary and deeply wrong. His pale skin contrasted sharply with his dark, sunken eyes, and his smile was too wide, too forced, as if it had been carved into his face. "Fill her up?" Earl asked, his voice low and raspy, each word drawn out just a bit too long. Sam hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, pump 4. Earl swiped Sam's card, his eyes fixed on him the entire time. "Long drive, huh?" "Yeah," Sam replied uneasily, glancing out the window at the diner. "Just passing through." Earl chuckled, the sound dry and humorless. "Passing through? Funny how folks always say that." Sam grabbed his receipt and left without another word. Something about Earl's gaze lingered in the back of his mind as he filled up his tank and drove away. 15 minutes later, Sam noticed something strange. The gas station's neon sign appeared ahead of him again. Confused, he slowed down, checking the road signs. Had he made a wrong turn? Pulling into the gravel lot, his unease deepened. Everything was exactly as he had left it. The pumps, the diner, even Earl standing behind the counter grinning. "You're back already?" Earl asked as Sam entered. "What?" "No, I just left here," Sam stammered. Earl tilted his head. "Did you?" Hard to tell time in a place like this. Sam's stomach twisted. He turned and left without refueling, determined to drive in the opposite direction. No matter which road Sam took, he always ended up back at Jasper's Gas and Diner. Each time the station seemed to decay further. The pumps were coated in something sticky and black, the diner's lights flickered erratically, and Earl's grin had grown wider, almost splitting his face. The patrons inside the diner weren't silhouettes anymore. They turned to stare at Sam as he passed, their faces blank and their eyes hollow. The neon sign now read, "Jasper's Gas and Diner, open forever," and Earl's voice had taken on a distorted, inhuman quality. Sam screamed at Earl, demanding to know what was happening. But Earl only laughed, a guttural sound that made Sam's skin crawl. "You're here because you stopped," Earl said cryptically. "Nobody stops unless they're meant to." Sam tried everything to escape. He sped down the highway, ignoring the gas gauge as it crept toward empty. He abandoned his car and ran on foot until his lungs burned. But every path, every choice, led him back to the gas station. In one loop, Sam broke into the diner. The patrons sat unmoving, their skin pale and waxy. He shook one of them, only for the figure to collapse into a pile of ash. A waitress appeared from the kitchen, holding a plate of food that writhed like it was alive. "You should eat," she said, her voice eerily familiar. Sam stared at her in horror. Her face was a distorted version of his own. Determined to find answers, Sam forced his way into the clerk's office behind the counter. The room was cluttered with old maps, photos, and a dusty ledger. Flipping through its pages, Sam found names, dates, and photos of people who had stopped at the station. The final page sent chills down his spine. It held a picture of him, dated that very night. Scribbled beneath his photo were the words, "Belongs to Jaspers." Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the walls began to warp, pulsating like a living thing. Earl's voice boomed from the front room. "You shouldn't have looked in there, friend," he growled. Sam turned to run but froze as shadowy figures filled the hallway, their eyes glowing faintly. Earl appeared at the doorway, his human guise slipping away. His face stretched unnaturally, his skin turning ashen, and his eyes glowed like embers. "You see, this place isn't just a gas station. It's a doorway, and now you're part of it." The shadows closed in, dragging Sam back to the counter. Earl's grin widened impossibly as he placed a hand on Sam's shoulder. "Don't worry, you'll get used to it. Everyone does." Sam's screams echoed as the station's lights dimmed. A week later, a new traveler drove down the same stretch of highway, low on gas. They spotted the flickering neon sign, "Jasper's Gas and Diner, open 24 hours. Inside, Earl greeted them with his usual grin, and standing beside him, wearing the same unsettling smile, was Sam. "Fill her up?" Sam asked, his voice hollow and monotone. The traveler hesitated, glancing at the diner. Sam's grin widened. "Trust me, you're going to love it here." The highway stretched endlessly, a black ribbon slicing through an ocean of trees. Jenna and Mark were on the tail end of a cross-country road trip, their usual banter replaced by the hum of tires on asphalt and the faint static of the radio. The dashboard illuminated the dreaded fuel light, blinking insistently. Mark cursed under his breath. "I swear I checked the tank." Jenna leaned forward, squinting at the dark road ahead. "Keep your eyes peeled. There's got to be a gas station soon." After miles of darkness, a dim sign appeared on the horizon. "Earl's Gas, last stop for 50 miles. The letters flickered as if struggling to stay lit. The gas station sat like a relic from another time, its single pump leaning precariously. The building's windows were caked with grime, and the surrounding woods loomed closer than seemed natural. "This place is straight out of a horror movie," Jenna muttered. Mark parked by the pump and they both hesitated. The attendant, Earl, was visible through the smudged glass. He stood unnervingly still, watching them. "I'll fill up. Stay in the car," Mark said, his voice tense. Inside, Earl barely acknowledged Mark's presence at first, his gaunt face locked in a vacant stare. "Pump one, please," Mark said, sliding his card across the counter. Earl didn't move. Instead, he leaned in closer, his voice a low growl. "You need to leave, now." Mark frowned, confused. "Excuse me." "Don't stop here, don't stop anywhere on this road," Earl said, his voice trembling. "Fill up and go, you've been noticed." "What does that mean?" Before Mark could press further, Earl vanished. One moment, he was behind the counter. The next, the space was empty, coated in a thick layer of dust. Even the faint smell of gasoline disappeared, replaced by a metallic tang. Mark returned to the car. Jenna noticed his pale face immediately. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Just a weird guy. Let's go." As they pulled out of the station, the darkness seemed to press closer, the trees looming taller and thicker than before. The road, which had been a straight shot earlier, now twisted unnaturally. Jenna's phone buzzed in her lap. She grabbed it, hopeful, but the screen only displayed one word: "Stop." "Mark," she whispered, showing him the phone. The creature makes itself known. The car's engine sputtered, and the vehicle jerked violently. Mark cursed, pulling onto the shoulder. The engine cut out completely, leaving them in silence. Before either could speak, the woods came alive with sound, branches cracking, leaves rustling, and a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down their spines. "Stay here," Mark said, grabbing a flashlight from the glove compartment. "Don't you dare," Jenna hissed. but Mark was already out of the car, the beam of his flashlight slicing through the oppressive dark. He saw nothing at first, just trees and shadows. Then a pair of glowing eyes appeared in the distance, reflecting the light. They blinked, and a massive figure darted closer with inhuman speed. Back to the gas station, Mark scrambled back to the car, slamming the door as the creature roared. "Drive!" Jenna screamed. "I can't! The car's dead!" Mark yelled, fumbling with the keys. In a panic, Jenna looked around and spotted the gas station's flickering sign through the trees. "We have to go back." Mark hesitated but nodded. They abandoned the car and ran through the woods, the creature's guttural snarls growing louder behind them. When they reached the clearing, the gas station looked different. The building was pristine, its windows glowing warmly, and 2 pumps stood upright. Earl was waiting for them outside, but his face was different, smooth, unlined, and expressionless. "You didn't leave," Earl said flatly. "You disappeared," Mark shouted. Earl didn't respond. Instead, he stepped aside, motioning toward the station. Reluctantly, Jenna and Mark entered. The interior was unrecognizable, bright, modern, and entirely too sterile. Shelves were stocked with pristine products, none of which bore labels. "What is this place?" Jenna whispered. "You've entered its territory," Earl said, appearing behind them. "And it doesn't let go easily." Mark grabbed Earl by the collar. "What is stalking us? What do you mean it doesn't let go?" Earl's face twitched, his expression flickering like static. "The woods belong to something older than you can comprehend. It hunts those who stop here. But it doesn't just kill. It plays. It makes you a part of its game." Mark released him, stepping back. "What game?" "Survival," Earl said, his form flickering again. "But no one wins. You'll always end up back here." As if to prove his point, the door to the station opened, revealing their abandoned car. Refusing to give in, at the pump, Mark and Jenna bolted from the station, running toward their car. The creature waited for them, its grotesque form towering over the vehicle. Its skin glistened like oil, and its eyes burned like embers. Mark grabbed the shotgun from the trunk, a relic from their camping gear, and fired. The creature recoiled but didn't fall. "Get in!" Mark shouted as Jenna climbed into the car. The engine miraculously roared to life. Mark floored it, plowing through the creature, which shattered into a cloud of black smoke. As dawn broke, they found themselves driving into what looked like a small town. Relief flooded them until they noticed the familiar sign. Earl's Gas, last stop for 50 miles. The station now stood in the center of the town, surrounded by identical buildings, all marked with the same flickering sign. Jenna gasped. "We never left." Mark turned to her, his face pale. "I don't think we ever will." In the rearview mirror, Earl watched them, his flickering smile now stretching unnaturally wide. A week later, another late-night traveler pulled into Earl's Gas. The attendant, a young man with tired eyes and a hollow smile, greeted them. "Fill her up?" he asked. His name tag now read Mark. The highway stretched endlessly before Jack, a black void illuminated only by his headlights. His rig hummed steadily, a soothing monotony that had carried him through countless halls. But tonight felt different. The night was eerily quiet. Even the usual faint sound of crickets and distant howls was absent. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, though he was utterly alone on the road. His fuel gauge dipped below empty, and a sharp pang in his bladder reminded him he needed to stop soon. A neon sign appeared on the horizon, flickering weakly. "Roadside rest area, open 24/7. Jack sighed in relief and pulled into the lot, his rig coming to a halt with a groan. The building was small and decrepit, the kind of place most would avoid. But Jack had no choice. Jack stepped out of his truck, the cold night air biting his skin. He walked to the restroom, its door slightly ajar, creaking in the wind. A single bulb buzzed above, casting a dim, sickly yellow light. The stench hit him immediately, a rancid mix of mildew, urine, and something metallic like blood. Inside, the restroom was worse than he had imagined. The walls were cracked, the tiles stained, and the mirrors smeared with grime. A row of stalls stretched along the back wall, their doors crooked and peeling. "Just get it over with," he muttered, stepping into the nearest stall. As Jack finished his business, he heard the restroom door creak open. "Someone else out there?" he called, peeking under the stall. No feet. The sound of heavy breathing echoed through the room. Jack froze, his heart pounding. Slowly, he pushed open the stall door and stepped out. The restroom had changed. The walls were darker, the grime thicker, and the air colder. The single bulb flickered erratically, casting distorted shadows. "Hello?" he called again, his voice trembling. A loud bang came from one of the stalls. Jack spun around, his eyes wide. One stall door swung open slowly, creaking on its rusted hinges. Inside, there was nothing but darkness, an unnatural, consuming blackness that seemed to pulse and writhe. Jack turned toward the exit, but the door was gone. In its place was another row of stalls, stretching endlessly into the darkness. "This can't be real," he whispered, backing away. He walked cautiously, passing stall after stall. Each one was slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of horrors that made his stomach churn. In one stall, he saw a version of himself, young and terrified, hiding under a table as his father's drunken screams echoed through the house. In another, he saw his late wife, Emily, standing in their old kitchen. Her back was to him, but when she turned, her face was decayed, her eyes hollow sockets. "Why didn't you save me?" she rasped, blood dripping from her mouth. Jack stumbled back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. A low, guttural voice began to echo through the restroom. "Jack, you can't run from me." "Who are you?" he shouted, spinning around. The voice only laughed, a deep, chilling sound that made his skin crawl. As he wandered deeper into the maze, the walls began to close in, the air growing thicker and harder to breathe. The stalls seemed alive, their doors creaking open to show flashes of his worst memories. He saw the aftermath of a car crash, his truck twisted and burning on the side of the road. Inside, he saw himself, bloodied and lifeless. "No, no, no," he whispered, closing his eyes. When he opened them, he was back at the start of the maze. For the first time, Jack wasn't alone. A figure stood at the end of the row, shrouded in darkness. Its shape was human, but its movements were unnatural, jerky, like a puppet on strings. "Why are you doing this?" Jack shouted. The figure didn't respond. It tilted its head, a chilling mimicry of curiosity, and took a step forward. Jack ran. He darted between stalls, his boots echoing loudly against the tiles. No matter how fast he ran, the figure was always just behind him, its heavy, deliberate footsteps growing louder. Jack burst into a new section of the maze, skidding to a halt. The walls here were covered in mirrors, all reflecting different versions of himself, some younger, some older, and some horribly distorted. The mirrors began to speak, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of blame and guilt. "You left her to die. You were never good enough. You'll never escape." Jack covered his ears, but the voices grew louder, drilling into his mind. In the center of the room stood a single stall, its door pristine and untouched. A sign on the door read, "Face the truth." Jack hesitated, his hands trembling. The voice from before returned, now softer, almost soothing. "Go ahead, Jack. Open it. End this." With a deep breath, he pushed the door open. Inside was not a stall, but a small, dimly lit room. A table sat in the center, and on it was a photo album. He stepped inside, the door slamming shut behind him. The album contained pictures of his life, moments of joy, pain, and regret. As he flipped through, the pages began to bleed, the images twisting into grotesque parodies of his memories. The voice spoke again. "You've lived your life in fear, Jack. Fear of failure, fear of love, fear of yourself. Now you must decide. Stay here and face it, or run forever." The room began to shake, the walls cracking and oozing black liquid. Jack dropped the album and screamed, "I'll face it! Just let me out!" The shaking stopped. The door opened, revealing the outside world. Jack stumbled out into the lot, gasping for air. His truck was still there, the restroom gone. He climbed into the cab, his hands still shaking, and sped away, vowing never to stop at a roadside restroom again. Months later, Jack sat in a diner, telling his story to fellow truckers. Most laughed it off, calling it a hallucination. But one old trucker leaned in. "You stopped at the restroom," he said. "It shows up for those who need it. Some make it out, most don't." Jack froze. What happens to those who don't? The old man shrugged. No one knows. That night, as Jack drove, his radio crackled. Through the static, a familiar voice whispered, "See you again, Jack." Thanks for tuning in to another chilling tale here on Eerie Encounters. If you love the scares, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a bone-chilling story. Have a terrifying tale of your own? Drop it in the comments below, and you might just hear it featured in an upcoming episode. Stay scared, stay spooky, and remember, the night is never as quiet as it seems. Until next time, keep the lights on.